Good evening and welcome everybody to today's program at the Commonwealth Club. My name is Melissa Kane. I'm the politics and legal reporter for CBS Bay Area, and I'm so excited to be your moderator this evening. Joining us, of course, is Sean Spicer. Y'all know Sean. He has had a long career in Republican politics. He has worked for members of the House of Representatives. He was an assistant at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. He was a Republican National Committee chief strategist, a top advisor to presidential campaigns, and of course, White House press secretary and communications director to President Donald Trump. He's also the author of the new book, The Briefing, Politics, the Press, and the President. We're so excited to have him here at the Commonwealth Club. Please welcome Sean Spicer.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate you guys having me. What a welcome in San Francisco. I look forward to hearing your questions and having a great conversation tonight.
Were you nervous? Did you know what to expect in San Francisco?
I double-checked that it was San Francisco, California, but you know, I've been here a couple times since I left the White House, and in both cases, it actually was a really enjoyable trip. Really good people, really intelligent questions, really respectful dialogue, and so I enjoyed it, and I look forward to coming back this time.
Excellent. Well, we're gonna ruin all that. No, I'm just kidding. So, I'm kidding-ish. So, we are in no shortage of things to talk about, but tonight I'd like to start the program by taking us back to a simpler time. It's the mid-90s, and a young college graduate, Mr. Sean Spicer, is in Washington, D.C. He's got the political bug, and like young people in Washington, D.C. with the political bug, there are a number of different avenues you can take. You can become a policy expert. You can start laying the groundwork to run for office someday. But for young Sean Spicer, he had a different dream. His dream was, I want to make sure I quote this, I wanted to become a press secretary. Why?
Oh, to go back. I loved the adrenaline rush and the instant gratification. So the policy guys and the legislative guys that I talked to would talk about how you've been working on this issue for years, and I think this time, you know, we might get this action going forward. But I was like, well, how do you know if you're ever moving the ball forward? And the thing that was interesting about engaging in press was you either knew whether you advanced your story or not, whether or not you changed the narrative and achieved the goal that you wanted, and so you kind of had this instant sense every day. And obviously, there wasn't an internet back then, and there was no social media, et cetera. You had deadlines, and you kind of knew, like, okay, when the paper came out or the broadcast came out at 6 o'clock, did the story come out in a way that you liked? Did it not come out at all? And there was this instant sense of knowing that you were either winning or losing, if you will, every day.
Now it's really instant, huh?
Yeah. There's a little bit of change that's happened.
You also wrote that working in the White House and speaking for the president has been a dream of mine. Now, was that dream to work for a president, or did you have a special sort of affinity for?
No, I mean, look. I, as a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was like you watch The West Wing and you're like, wow, that's really cool. But the interesting thing about it is that I never thought it was something that I could ever do. Right? I grew up from a working class family in a non-political, non-connected family. I talk about how when I went to Washington, I just thought if I can get a job on Capitol Hill, that's cool, and then I'm going to move home. But even in the last several years, like, the trajectory that I had is not what a normal press secretary would have. If you look back through Obama and Bush, Clinton, it's the person and the people who fill those roles are generally people that have been close to the candidate because they were on the campaign. They were served with them when they were previous office holders. It was really not something that I thought was ever going to be in my career trajectory.
Well, tell us, how did it work? I mean, did you sort of meet with the president and get his thoughts on what he wanted you to say about certain things, or did you just know exactly what he wanted you to say, or how did it work? So prior to the press briefing, what kind of conversations were you having with the president?
So that was an evolving process in the sense that, when I took the job, right, I met with all my predecessors, not all of them, I'm sorry, but I met with several of them on both sides of the aisle, and I was like, okay, how does this work on a daily basis? When do you talk to the president? How much feedback do you get? And so I thought, okay, like I got this. Like we had done mock sessions. I'd been in Washington a long time, and I had been around the process. And so I talked to these guys, and so early on, I did what had traditionally been the case. So you would sit down with the subject matter experts, whether it's National Security Council, National Economic Council, Office of Legislative Affairs, and say, okay, what's our position on this? Where are we on this? And what I found very quickly was that the president's view was, if you're going to state something that where what I believe or view something, you need to come talk to me. And if you don't, then don't say this is our position, because I want to make that decision, not some head of office or agency or subject matter expert. So you can come run it by me and say, this is what your team suggests, what do you think? But he, in particular, really cared about the exact words and phrases that were used, which was just not something that had been not only traditionally the case, frankly, but also like throughout my career. Generally speaking, you developed a comfort level with a principle or a cause or an institution that I had worked for. You kind of knew where that, what you were free to say or communicate. He really was particular about the words. And so when I say it was an evolving process, initially it was like, go out and be like, okay, I got this. This is what, the NSC guy says. This is what the counsel's office says. He was like, look, if you're going to say this, say something in this subject area, then I want to clear it. So you started to learn, okay, you go in, you say, I think we're going to get asked about these 5 subjects. How do you want me to communicate it? This is what I recommend.
Did you ever say no? Or get direction and then go out and say, I'm not going to do that?
There were times when I would say, look, that's unsustainable or untenable because of the following. And, we would go back and forth and sometimes come to a point where I would say, look, we just need to say it in this way, or we're going to, and what happened more often than not is that he would say, just say, the president believes the following, or the president views the situation as such. So, someone would say, what does he believe about this? And I would say, he believes X.
And that way, it's not Sean Spicer believes
well,
X.
Right, and frankly, and I know that, I address this in the book a lot, but that a job of a spokesman isn't to tell you what they're supposed to think or what, it's to say, hey, in lieu of them being present, I will communicate their views and beliefs on a particular subject. So that's what the role is, and I think a lot of times people didn't necessarily like or believe what he was saying and say, well, therefore it's your fault. Well, I get that, but my job and any spokesman's job isn't to get in the way of communicating directly what they believe.
Well, yeah, because when there was the issue with the president tweeting, this is I think around March, that President Obama had bugged Trump Tower, there was a lot of, you said a lot of the president believes right. In response to those questions. That was a little dicey. I have a question for you that actually means seriously. Does the president need a press secretary? He seems to do a pretty decent job.
I think in the sense that that the job isn't just, there's a lot of aspects to the job, right? There is a coordination aspect, a logistical aspect, and then there's a lot of things that go on off camera on a daily basis where they might have a question about a budget issue or personnel announcement, a policy rollout that's not necessarily what he thinks or views. I think to that extent, he clearly, the dynamic of a normal press secretary has been flipped on its head with him in terms of communicating what he believes on any particular issue. However, there is still a massive function that needs to be served.
Well, you do talk in the book about how you, at one point, as we said in the introduction, used to work for the trade representative.
Right.
And in that capacity, you promoted the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Correct.
And then you had to go out and say, actually, this is bad for American people. It's, the president is pulling out of that. And you gave that as an example of a time when you had to sort of put your own opinion aside
right.
and give the president's perspective. Were there any other times or any other subjects?
Look, I think I've not worked for an individual that I've ever agreed with 100%. That's not And I don't think that there's many people that can say when they go to work every day, unless they work for themselves, that they go. But I mean, and I'm not trying to put you in a bad position, but I guarantee you that at some point there's a story that's run on your air where you've said, like, I really didn't agree with how we covered that, or I don't know why we covered that at all. But if you're in a business that you're not the CEO of, then there's always going to be some degree, and the question is what degree, you know, if it's 5% or 25 or whatever, that you have aren't in sync with. That's just the nature of the thing. I worked for President Bush. There were some policies and decisions that he made that I didn't agree with.
Like what?
I mean, there were some spending issues, and just in terms of Medicare Part D, there were some rollouts, and it wasn't all like, hey, this is 100% against. I'm like, why are we doing it this way? I think this is, that. But at the end of the day, that wasn't my job. I have yet to meet any candidate that I agree with 100%. And, but that's, again, you can't go, you're not looking for purity, or you're in the wrong line of work.
Right. I'm just asking now that you're not there, and you don't have to give that other opinion. If there, aside from the TPP, there's anything that you had to sort of swallow your opinion on?
I think that, like, for example, there's some rollouts that I talk about in the book that I don't think were done effectively. In other words, there are times when I think that they had the right idea and the wrong execution, or the wrong coordination, and that when you're going to roll out big things, you have to look at the whole of government and say, okay, if you're going to achieve this goal, you need to coordinate and sync the following things. And sometimes, for a variety of reasons, sometimes it was because we didn't have the right people in place.
You're talking about the extreme vetting?
Yeah. I don't think that was that, and I write that in the book. I don't think how we handled that was done well. But again, it's not that at the end of the day,
but you
your
didn't
job,
say that, right? You had to go to the press
right,
briefing every day and say, we have run this up the flagpole. It is totally fine.
Your job is not to go there and do analysis and say, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to tell you where we screwed up today. I mean,
that would be great.
You're not going to have a ton. I'm sure you guys would be, but that's not you wouldn't last real long. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, and I think sometimes being the public face of something is where you bear the brunt of the criticism. But you kind of, that comes with the territory.
It doesn't look very fun.
There were some good moments, and there were some more difficult ones. But I think, to your point, I wrote in the book, look, there were plenty of days when I look back and say, like, hey, what I want to do over that day? Or was I part of the problem, not part of the solution? Could I have used a better tone that day? Could I have been the better person? 100%. And part of the reason I wanted to write the book was because I'm not perfect by any means. I made mistakes. I think that we need to, especially in this current culture, recognize and respect that there are people with views that you don't agree upon, but that are very valid, and that they have a right to express them and to be heard. And that too often the case, we're judging people, we are condemning them without listening to them and respecting them. And that if I can at this point be part of the solution, then that's a good thing. That we are at a point right now in this country where we want to yell at each other and imply motives for why someone believes what they do without actually understanding their background, their history, their experiences, and that they have every right to have those views. But I think both sides are doing it.
Now, you said that there were some days you'd want to do over. Let's talk about one.
Oh, thank
you. Your first press conference. You write in the book about the audience size issue. Tell us about give us some of the context and background of what's going on there.
Yeah, so I think that's the big winner for do-over day. And there's a lot. I mean, and someone, the follow-up question I get once in a while is like, which part? I'm like, let's just go all. I'm not, and I think you know, I'm very upfront. I think you've read the book. That part of what I try to explain in the book isn't to excuse it; it's to explain it, and to say, look, there's a mindset. And again, I like to start off by saying, like, I get it. Like, I don't like when I look at the tape and I'm like, oh, who is that guy? Because I don't like the tone. I'm not someone who likes to yell and get mad. But part of what people ask me sometimes is, like, what was going through your mind? And there were two things that were happening. One is, and this is kind of the overarching thing, which was we had this sense of negativity that was persistent. We're not good enough. Our ground game was horrible. Hillary's digital program was better. I mean, everything was, we would sit there and have these things throughout the campaign. We would have a conversation with reporters and pundits and stuff and say, hey, look, let's sit down and have a conversation about what we're doing. And we would immediately be dismissed. You can't win this state. Your ground game is horrible. She has 1,000 people in Brooklyn. There's no way that you can match this program. And it was just over and over again. So president gets sworn in. Go down to the White House, and he says, "Hey, let's show the American people I'm getting down to work, doing their agenda. I'm signing a series of initial executive orders and actions." We bring the press corps into the White House, into the Oval Office, to do what they call a pool spray, which is when, anytime the president moves, there's this representative group of the media that witness everything he does. And so, Poole comes in, president's here, I'm doing this, getting down to work, da da da. 20 minutes later, I'm getting this, like, four-alarm fire. The bust of Martin Luther King has been removed from the Oval Office, and I'm like, what's, wait a second, this is not, like, so people are rushing into the Oval Office, taking pictures, like, it wasn't removed, and I'm going back and I'm sitting down with the Pool, and I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, he's here, your job is to kind of report what he's doing, here's the color in the room, and there's a bus that apparently somebody was blocking. I'm like, that's the mentality, really? Not what he's doing, not who was there, not the atmosphere, but what you got wrong. That's what's going through our head now. It's like, you've got to be kidding. This is how we're starting this administration. Frankly, with a racially inflammatory accusation that the president did this thing. And like him or not, it's just, so then we get this update. Apparently someone was blocking our view, which would have been behind him, meaning that it wasn't, hey, what's going on at the Resolute desk, who's in the room. It was literally trying to figure out, what can I get you on? Okay. The president wakes up the next day and he's like, turns on the television, calls me up. It's like, what's going on? Now they're talking about, hey, there weren't that many people there and this is what's happening. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So again, I'm not excusing, I'm explaining, which is just to say, understand the mindset, which is, we've now done all this. You want to critique the speech, you want to talk about the agenda, I get it. But it's like nitpick about here's what you don't have, here's what you did wrong. So I'm like, okay, it's the Saturday of a 3-day weekend. All these federal employees had busted their hump to get the inauguration. There weren't a ton of them fleeing to work on a Saturday morning. And so I'm like, how do I figure out how to construct something? So I start getting emails from folks like, hey, what was your web traffic like? How many people watching this live? Now the kicker is, I'm like, hey, I'm on safe ground because a lot of these platforms didn't even exist 8 years ago. Therefore, it's so obvious, like Snapchat and all the things that people in this part of the country invented didn't exist.
You're welcome.
I'm not really sure that helped. And so anyway, I'm thinking, okay, I can start talking about audiences and kind of divert this a little from number of people in the mall. And admittedly, again, not the strongest argument or best case. But the goal was to try to figure out a way to say, hey, look, this is silly. Let's talk about excitement, enthusiasm, people watching it in different ways instead of focusing on it. Did not come off really well. But since you asked me to relive it, here you go.
Can we get a drink?
Now, the kicker.
But here's the thing.
I apologize, but here's the kicker. So I walk back into my office, and the press briefing room is literally it's in the West Wing. It's 20 feet from the press briefing room, 20 feet from the Oval Office. So you're like, I walk back in, I sit at my desk, the phone rings, and like, the president's on the phone for you. And I'm like, hello. And I'm thinking, attaboy, right? He's like, what was that? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I went in, tough. He's like, that was horrible. What were you thinking? Like, crowds, like you, that, and I'm going, oh my God, like, I don't even have my ID. Like, I'm done. Like, and I like I said, I just, it was not.
You wrote, it was the beginning of the end.
Yeah, no question. I just, it was, I don't see, looking back, if you know, from an analytical standpoint, I don't think there's any way that there was a means to recover from that.
Well, I have a question for you, and I mean this earnestly.
Oh, this is good.
So I've had 18 months. Who
Can we get Melissa a glass of
about
wine?
the crowd size? You won. Why didn't you act like it? Like, why were you on a scavenger hunt for how many people rode the metro?
but
who cares? Strut up to the microphone and say, we're grateful for who was here.
I wish you had been with me. Look, you're at, I mean, I'm not, like I said, I don't know how many other terms I can put this. I'm not like sitting here going, what, I don't get how you don't understand it. It's like, I get that was, and you're right, I think we should have gone out and said, you know, kind of dismissed it. I can't believe, yes, I've replayed that day in my head more times than you can imagine.
Let's
Period.
talk more about it. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. You also wrote in the book about that day, with so much to convey, it was inevitable that mistakes would happen, but I did promise that if we ever issued an inaccurate statement, we would correct the record. Did you ever do that?
I corrected the record several times.
On what?
There was one instance with respect to the number of prisoners in Gitmo. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but I literally remember multiple briefings starting off by saying, yesterday you asked about this, we said this at the time, here's the update, this is what we, or, you know, I meant to say the following, whether on a whole host of things.
Okay, excellent. I have to ask, because I don't want to bog you down with everything current, but because it is so relevant, while you were press secretary, you did say that the president's tweets are considered official statements by the president. And then yesterday, the president tweeted, among other things, Attorney General Jeff Sessions should stop this rigged witch hunt right now before it continues to stain our country any further. So, is that an official statement?
It's the President of the United States saying something. I don't see how you can bifurcate him tweeting from his official account to not being official. I mean, if the president speaks something, it's official. If he writes it, it's official. I don't see how it can be anything other.
So it's your understanding that Jeff Sessions is in trouble if he doesn't stop this investigation?
I think the president's expressed his frustration with both Sessions and the investigation for 18 months. I think that's probably pretty consistent with a lot of other tweets that have come before that.
Yeah, but does this sound like to you? So today, yesterday, Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that it's not an order; it's just the president's opinion.
What is?
The tweet saying Jeff Sessions should stop the rigged witch hunt. She said that's not an order; it's just an opinion. And assuming all tweets are his opinion, does that strike you as an order?
I mean, I guess in the sense that if the president wanted to fire Sessions and/or Rod Rosenstein, he could just do it. So, I mean, if
you're Jeff Sessions, are you like, okay?
I wouldn't be. I don't think he's probably really excited when he reads those. But I think there's. The answer is that clearly Sessions isn't doing it, so therefore it's not an order. Because if the president was insistent on it, he'd say you're fired then. That's the only way I can.
Do we have to sort of back into the order?
No, I don't. I'm not there, so I have a hard time going in and saying to him, "Hey, look, this is how this is being interpreted. I think we should clarify it, or you should do one of these three things because this is how people are reacting to it. But I clearly think if it was an order, he would say, you haven't done it, therefore you're fired, but which he hasn't done. So, you know, I can only tell you what I see in the same way that you see it right now.
So it's an official statement, but you don't believe it's an order?
I guess so, yeah. I mean, I don't know how you can say that the president just said something or tweeted something and it's not an official statement. I mean, again, if he was walking by the press corps and said, I believe the following, whatever, I think that's an official statement. And any utterance from him, whether it's written, electronic, or oral, has to be treated as an official statement of the president.
Did you wake up yesterday and think, maybe for the millionth time, I am so glad I don't have to get up and answer questions about this today?
I've pretty much gotten used to that feeling, yes.
Would you have answered?
Can I just, I think the amount of it, that until you have it, it's even hard to explain it, but there's a level of intensity that just bears on you every day, knowing that, and sometimes it's not just, tweets and statements and stuff, but it's truly like getting a call at 3 a.m. saying the following situation has occurred, and you're like, holy smokes. I mean, there is, you be prepared to brief on this, or, we have a meeting that you're going to have to get read in on something. And it's knowing that you don't know when, whether it's domestic or international, an incident's going to occur that you need to be ready to address.
You wrote in the book that you have a sort of alarm on your phone for when the president tweets?
Notification.
Or you did, a notification?
Yeah.
Did it have a special ring?
No. I say that not because I wouldn't do it. It's more because I need someone here to probably figure out how to help set that up.
I'm just picturing you in like a grocery store or something, and you hear it, and it's like, and there's that moment of.
No, but you would learn to just, because again, it's just it vibrates like a text message for me, and you're just like, okay, here's something we're changing, gear up,
gird your loins. Here we go. Okay, so you believe it's official, but not necessarily an order.
Sure. Final answer.
Okay, so another couple of questions.
What else you got there?
All right. Well, I have a little side question for you. Omarosa is coming out with a book in a couple weeks. Are you nervous?
No.
Did you get along with her? Do you think she's going to say nice things about you?
I don't know. Look, I'm not one. I don't like to speak ill of any person. So let's just leave it at that.
Bob,
I'm sorry. I don't think. Look, I don't think that's the right thing to do. I'll let her have her book.
Bob Woodward also has a book coming out. Did you talk to him?
Yes.
What'd you say, just between us? Just talk to the plant. All right. Okay, interesting. Now, I love the way you start the book. It's actually such an intriguing first line. Sorry. Your first line is, "The president wanted to see me." I'm in. Fantastic. Why did you you literally begin the first chapter with the end. Why did you make that decision?
Because I think it's kind of central to the story, which is, okay, so you get this job, and what was the impetus for doing this, for leaving? I think for a lot of people, that becomes their, why was that the threshold? What was the straw that broke the camel's back? And I just figured, let's just get this out of the way. And, it seemed to be, as I was going around the country having the opportunity to talk to folks, initially that became the big thing. And so I just thought, okay, let's put it on the table right away.
Now, you write that when you sat down to write your resignation letter.
Correct.
You changed the date to July 21st from mid-May. So you had already started drafting your letter in mid-May. Why?
To the point that we made a minute ago, from day one, I knew that it started off poorly. And I have an entire chapter in the book, chapter 9, that is basically like all of these memes that started to come up. And for good or bad, sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional, what's well-deserved or not, I became the story too often. And as a reporter, you know you're never supposed to be the story. You tell a story. As a press secretary, you're supposed to communicate an idea and a message, not become the story. My view was I too often was becoming the story. And as May rolled around, I said, look, this is not working out. And I hesitated at that time, and I talked to my wife, and I said, I just don't see how this gets better. And so there was a discussion for a while in the White House that, like, look, my wheelhouse had always been strategy and big picture, and I was dual-hatted as communications director and press secretary, and so I started having a conversation that maybe we should bring in someone to handle the briefings and lead the press team, and I would slide over to do the communications. And so I thought for a while, if we can make that shift work, then we could figure out a way to go forward. But that wasn't going to be the case, and therefore, I'm a believer that sometimes God gives you a sign. Sometimes He literally hits you in the face and says, "Go." And this was Him saying to me, "Listen, here's your off ramp. Take it."
So the mooch was a sign from God. Is that what you're saying?
No one has ever put it that way, Melissa. And I would never. I actually think that's probably a pushback on that.
Okay. But you do write about a story that's really funny in the book about your singular interaction with him. Can you talk about that a little bit? About where you were having a meeting. It was very somber, and sort of the moment you had with him, which is just very where he comes in and hugs.
Oh well, so I had.
So weird.
I mean, just to walk back, I basically. The president, that Friday morning, it's 10 a.m., he says, look, this is what we want to do. And Anthony walks back with Reince, and they start talking about logistics, and they had to figure out some paperwork kind of thing on how to get him, because he owned a company, all this stuff, and they had to get the lawyers. And I said, do you guys mind if I be right back? And they were like, yeah, fine, we got to get the lawyers involved. And I doubled back in the Oval Office, and that's when I just said to the president, thank you, but I've got to go. And then I knew, just because of my world, that it was 10 seconds before it leaked out. And so I said to my assistant, I said, please just gather the entire staff. Have them come to my office immediately. And so she's gathering them, and I didn't want them to hear it from some random tweet. I wanted them to know why I was doing what I was doing, how much I valued so many of them for what they had been through with me, and how much I cared about them. And so I'm in there, and I'm kind of like whatever, and the door opens, and Anthony's comes in, he wants to give me a hug, and I was like, we're not really on hugging terms. And so yeah, it was just, and again, I'm not I have nothing.
Everyone's standing around with tears in their eyes, and he comes in, and you called it a bro hug. He came in and was
no, I actually called it a faux bro hug.
Faux bro hug.
And I'm not really sure if that's a term, but
it is now.
Yeah. Right.
So I wanted to ask you, I have 3 letters here. I think you know what they are. SNL. Speaking of becoming the story, that must have been very surreal. Tell us about how you found out that was a thing.
This has been fun.
Next, we're going to talk about your trip to the dentist.
I'm surprised if there's a dentist that actually will perform a root canal next. They choose that. So Saturday nights were kind of the night that my wife and I could catch up and just talk, have dinner, whatever. So she goes to bed, I go to bed just 10, 15, 20 minutes after she does. She wakes up, we're getting the kids ready to go to church, and like most Sunday mornings is kind of a zoo. They're running around, we're trying to get them fed. And she's like, hey, did you see Saturday Night Live last night? And I said, no, I went to bed, just a little while after you. Why? And she goes, well, you're going to want to watch it. Now, we were, as I said, we were running a little late, so I was like, fine, I'll do it when we get back. And So we get the kids in the car, drive off to church. We're like in the middle of mass, and I'm trying to be very good about this. And I just, like, my phone's like, zzz, 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 zzz. And I was just like, I was like, I'm being tested. So I was good, and we walk out of mass, and I look down, and I was just like, I mean, it was just like, that was awesome, hysterical, dude. I mean, you know, oh my gosh, whatever. Da, 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 da. And my son's like, can we stop by Dunkin' Donuts? And I'm like, no! We're going home! And so we pull into the driveway. I run into the house, and I stand in our kitchen. We got a little TV in there. And I guess people in this area, like, it wasn't the cold open as the opening skit. So I've got this little fast forward thing going. And I see, like, the C-SPAN logo, and I'm like, okay, this has got to be it. And I just stood there and watched it. And I was like, oh, God. And I mean, there were, like, a million thoughts going through my head. Like, okay, it's funny. It's well-deserved. Oh, my God. You know, it's still like, you're like, this is Saturday Night Live, and that's me. And I mean, again, like, I grew up, you know, like mimicking skits from Chevy Chase and Chris Farley and, you know, you name it, Tina Fey. I mean, it was like, you know, remember, did you see that thing on Saturday Night? And now I was like, okay, that's me.
But someone gave you a super soaker, right?
I got a couple, yeah.
I also wanted to ask, this is an audience question. In what ways was the job as a White House press secretary different than what you expected?
All. When I took the job, I was having a conversation with Josh Ernst, and he's walking me through all this logistics stuff. And at the end of one of the conversations, I said, hey, can I ask you a question? Like, is there anything, like, personal, like, that I should be ready for in terms of, like, I had done 300, 400, 500 hits, television hits, when I was at the RNC. The closest anyone ever came to recognize me was, like, I was in the Joseph A. Banks in the sweater section at Christmas, and a guy's like, you're the Republican. And that was, like, it. So I was like, you know, you probably get a little bit more. And Josh is like, look, I just stopped taking UberX because it just became uncomfortable once in a while. And I was like, okay, well, I'm kind of a cheap guy. So whatever. And I, like, day 2, I get in this UberX, and the guy's like, oh, I know who you are. You're going to have to tip me. I literally was like, okay, black car. Not that but I was like, and I don't think the level of, like, intensity and scrutiny was even, like, I knew that there would be an elevation in, like, name ID, but, like, among the C-SPAN crowd. No offense.
This is us.
But I thought, okay, like, I get that. I just didn't think, and then obviously, like, there's a lot of protocols and traditions that, you know, kind of, and literally, like, I write in the book, I'm talking to Jeff Mason, who's the president of the White House Correspondents Association, about the press covering everything. He goes, look, the first couple weeks, people will come to your briefing, and then after that, it just thins out. And I, like, every day after, like, that second week, I'd be like, so is this the day it thins out, Jeff? Just so we're
Now, you actually, interestingly, sort of democratized that press room. Can you talk, because for those of us watching at home, we can't see all the hierarchies and the traditions in the room. That was a really interesting part of the book where you describe this sort of the way things generally are and the changes that you made.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I still get reporters that will say, you know, we really appreciate how you democratized the press briefing room, and I think that's important. So just to give you guys an understanding of how this works, there are 49 seats in the press briefing room. They're assigned by the White House Correspondents Association. And the first few rows are TV networks, wires, and then the big guys, Washington Post, New York Times, I think the LA Times has one, I can't remember, but you've got all the networks, the wires, and then the big ones. And then it kind of works back. And then that's for those who are assigned. So if you are not among the 49, you don't get a seat. You can stand if there's room, etc. I believe that there's a lot of voices in this country, and I thought that when I took over, one of my things was, I was like, there are a lot of people, foreign language media, business media, local television, talk radio. Everybody should have a voice in the briefing room because there are issues that don't get addressed by the big media that I think people have concerns on. I called on the Washington Blade, which represents LGBTQ issues. I called on Urban Radio. I called on Spanish language, and I would call on them a lot of times first. I brought in local media to Skype, so I would talk to a station like yours and say, okay, what's the issue in San Francisco? My view was the issues that are around, from around the country are equally important. There are things that aren't getting asked of the White House on a variety of cultural, fiscal, ethnic issues that are equally important as what sort of the PAC mentality has up front. And I wanted them to have a voice. And so in terms of one of the things that I'm probably the most proud of, it's that, because there were people that had been shut out essentially for a long time from even asking a question. I thought it was important because I thought, especially because so many people were watching, that they might say, hey, I care about that issue. I mean, I called on one station out west, and they were talking about like land issues. That's a huge issue for folks in part of the country. And I thought, okay, you know what? They deserve to have that question asked, and they need to know what the White House's position is on it.
Yeah, it was a local station in Oregon, I think, that called in. But
Right.
but if you go through some of those early press briefings, you can hear people calling in from Southern Ohio or
Right.
Skyping in from various places asking
Right.
questions. Really,
And I just thought it was important because they don't necessarily have the money or the resources to send somebody to Washington, D.C., but the things that affect their community, I thought were equally as important as what somebody from one of the big cable or network channels was asking.
oh, thank you. Now, also, you write about how you're pretty proud of the way you guys rolled out and got Neil Gorsuch confirmed. What do you make of, and you can read that in the book.
Well,
but,
but just to be clear, you can think but why it worked is because I think that one of the things that we suffered from early on was a lack of teamwork and cohesion. And there were and when I think there were a couple instances that I lay out, more as examples of, if you look at why it worked well, it's because there weren't a ton of leaks. It was people working together and having each other's back and working in concert together, as opposed to some of the other things that rolled out did not as well. And part of it was because if you looked at how they were done, it wasn't in a way that was coordinated well.
what do you make of the Kavanaugh process? Is it going as well, or?
I think so far it's gone as well as it could be. It looks like he's on path to get confirmed. Obviously, I haven't paid a ton of attention, but I haven't seen anything that would cause me not to think he's not going to get 50 votes.
Now, aside from the extreme vetting, what other things did you feel like were a problem because they weren't rolled out in a unified manner?
I think top of the list probably was Comey getting fired. I write about the process for that in the book, that, my job was to figure out how to communicate this, and I think it was like, hey, if you're gonna make a decision of this magnitude, there's a lot that needs to happen leading up to it. And again, as I was the one who bore the brunt of that, in the sense of, it was like, hey, how come this didn't go well? I'm like, well, let me show you a list. And so, that was one of the, to one of the earlier questions, like what was different. And it was like, I'd spent a career where you would craft a strategy and say, okay, if you want to achieve this goal, let's work backwards and figure out, here are the tactics, here's the timing, here's the messaging. Is everyone on board? Does everyone agree? What are the edits suggested? Are we all good? Let's get on the same page and go forward. And I think the dynamic now is, let's make the announcement and then go figure it out afterwards sometimes. And it was difficult, admittedly, because that's how I spent a career training and saying, this is how you roll something out.
What happened to Chris Christie?
There's two versions. I I still don't know what truly happened. There was one camp that said that Christie was sort of collateral damage because he had helped sentence Jared Kushner's father to jail. There was one camp that said that he didn't like that he had staffed a lot of the positions he had been, as part of the transition. The people that he was recommending were people that had been against the president, had been career lobbyists, all sorts of stuff. And to be honest, the pace that we're going at, it was sort of like, if you remember, if you can even remember the transition, it was like a million miles an hour. And I'm like, so what's going on? They're like, he's no longer leading it. Okay. There wasn't always time to step back and say, like, okay, like, what's the deal? They're like, he's no longer here. Who's in charge? And you're like, okay. But to this day, I'm not sure I know what the different narratives were. And it was sort of like, okay, but here's who's in charge and here's how it's going to go.
What's the First Lady like? She's such an enigma. I want her to have a thing. Like, she likes to roller skate, or she collects little ceramic cows or something. Like, what? Like, I need something.
She's unbelievably politically astute. She reads a lot, and it's very interesting. People ask all the time, who's the president's closest advisor, and I think hands down it's her. She does not like to be out front for obvious. You've seen that. I don't know that she's done a single interview yet, like on camera. She might have done one or two. She takes pride in a lot of the stuff that she does in the White House to maintain, kind of preserve the White House and work with the staff. And then she's got her projects there, and she's been involved in some children's issues. But she's not looking to be out front. But behind the scenes, unbelievably caring. And like I said, I think she amazes people when they meet her, how politically astute she is on the issues and the politics of what's going on at all times.
Who does the president listen to?
Well,
aside from her.
The thing is, it depends on the issue. So he's got a lot of former colleagues that he's worked with in business over the years, and it's like he kind of reaches out to them depending on what the issue is and kind of what their wheelhouse is. So there's everything like Ike Perlman to Rupert Murdoch, Bob Kraft, Steve Schwartzman. There's all of these people from his business background that he'll reach out to, but sometimes more on one issue than another. But honestly, that's the thing, is that he doesn't call us and say, hey, here are the 5 people I called last night. Sometimes you will read about who he talked to, but he doesn't always share who those people are either.
Gotcha. There was a bit of a dust-up at a press briefing between Mr. Acosta from CNN and Sarah Huckabee Sanders over the issue of a president's statement, I think at a rally, that the press is the enemy of the people. And so the question was, would Ms. Sanders say the press is not the enemy of the people? And they sort of butted heads. I'm sure you've probably seen it. But if you were in that position, would you have done the same? She essentially said, the president believes what he believes, and that's it.
Look, I think I've said before what the job is, right? And so you can't go out there and say, if the question is what does he believe, no matter whether you agree with it or not, full stop. That being said, I've been very clear about this. I think that any democracy, especially ours as the beacon of democracy throughout the world, needs to have a free, fair, and robust press corps, full stop. We need to understand that, like in every industry, there's good people, bad people, good professionals, bad people. I, in the book, literally name a bunch of great reporters.
It's amazing. I want to write a book someday just so I can make a list of people I don't hate. It's literally a list.
but the problem was, and I think you admit that there's a lot of reporters in there that I think people have been surprised by.
Maggie Haberman, New York Times.
And the point that I've made is that I don't agree with a lot of their stories sometimes, but I think that they are tough, tenacious, fair, and that's their job. That's different than dismissing them. I think that there's a lot of those reporters that do a good job and that are professional. I think there's a difference between where it crosses the line sometimes in terms of behavior. So I don't think it's good in any instance to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that like everybody's bad or everybody's good. There's good and bad in every single industry and profession. I think that you undermine bad behavior and negative reporting when you group everybody together, because you sort of now have cast everybody with one broad brush.
Yeah, and you say in the book that we have to do a better job at sort of pointing at a specific article and saying, this
Right.
is the thing I have a problem with, instead of saying, I don't like what you wrote, so it's
Right,
fake.
'cause I think that, look, I know that I've seen it on my side where people say, everyone who supports Trump is, and you fill in the blank, or every Republican is. It's like, if you do that, then everybody becomes guilty of the same thing. And I think that you shouldn't do that with anybody, as I said, but you can't do that with the press corps, because there are really good reporters out there that do a good job. And frankly, I would rather hold them up as the example and to say, these are the ones, look at how many tough stories come out, how many things that they've broken, but they've done it in a respectful, professional way. That should be admired. Those are good journalists. I think that it's a much stronger case to make when you can highlight the folks that are good, as opposed to dismissing everybody as a whole.
Well, I mean, we've seen, though, recent instances where certain rallies, people, for example, just the other night, were not violent, but people, I think, sort of were in fear that it might become violent. I mean, what's the responsibility there to not encourage that kind of behavior?
I think that, look, we have a country that allows people to express themselves freely. That's what makes us great. I think you can do so in a respectful and civil way, and I think it goes all around. So I think obviously, it's interesting, there's a code of conduct for our professional responsibility for journalists, and it says we invite criticism of our stories. I think people have a First Amendment right to criticize the story, but they can do so in a decent and respectful way. I think that's what's lacking in society right now, is that we've stopped having the ability to listen to people and say, okay, I disagree with you, but I respect you, and I think your points are valid. I don't agree with them, as opposed to shouting everybody down and saying that they're bad people because they belong to some particular group or class.
Now, if you were still in the White House, would you advise the president to tone down some of the rhetoric in terms of, pointing to the bag and that's fake news, and sort of turning?
I mean, look, yes, in the sense that I think I just expressed, which is to say, I think it's not an effective tactic.
Yeah, I agree. I just mean, would you tell him?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, excellent. I have a question here. Should the president be on Twitter? He's got a perfectly good staff.
I think the president views Twitter as something that has been effective for him. I don't know that he'd be president without it. So, whether he should be or shouldn't be, he is. And I think that in a lot of ways, as a tool, he's found it to be effective. I think obviously there's a lot of tweets that have caused a lot of concern for folks. But for him, I think it's his way of saying, okay, you want to know what I think on an issue? Here it is.
How's that again?
Okay. Next question.
Okay. This is a question. What does a GOP post-Trump look like to you? You've got a long history within the party.
Right.
What does the party look like?
So every president puts their stamp on a party, right? When Clinton took over in '92, he had been head of the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Committee, and it was more centrist, and there was a concern in the Democratic Party that it would drift to the center. When Bush became president, he shifted the Republican Party a little bit, in terms of like spending in particular. It wasn't, Obama put his stamp clearly on the Democratic Party. Parties ebb and flow with whoever's in charge. It's just going back throughout most of history. So I don't know the answer, in the sense that even with the Democratic Party, if you look at where it's headed, it's definitely drifting from where Obama was. Where the Republican Party goes, I don't know, because I would have never necessarily seen it shift the way that it has. So I don't know, does it keep going in that direction, more of a populist movement? Does it shift back? I think part of this is circumstances will start to dictate that. You know, where is the economy? What's going on in foreign policy? There's a lot of issues that I think, if you look at both parties, there's been this sort of move to the left in the Democratic Party and to the right in the Republican Party. But the Republican Party, interestingly, has taken on much more of a populist flavor than I would have anticipated. And so the question is, how does that manifest itself?
And what do you predict for the midterms?
I think the Senate, Republicans probably keep control of that. There's just so many Democrats in red states that Trump carried by 10 plus points. He's got Heitkamp, Donnelly in Indiana, Manchin in West Virginia. It's just it's target rich right now if you're a Republican versus Democrat. The field changes depending on the cycle. This cycle, Democrats are playing defense in many more seats than that are competitive than Republicans. The House, I think, is very difficult right now for Republicans to keep. I can make a case for them to maintain it, but it's going to be close. I think with the economy performing the way it is, that's the only thing that I think is keeping hope alive if you're a Republican. 4.1% economic growth, the job numbers looking the way they are. Traditionally, in a midterm, the party out of power loses 30 plus seats since the 1950s. So the odds are not with them. The economy is what's saving folks right now, because when you are in good economic times, you generally don't vote against an incumbent. So we've got these two competing interests. The biggest problem that Republicans have is they have 40 competitive open seats. So you've got several here in California, the ISIS seat, which is 29 or something, and then and so they're playing. It's kind of the opposite of the Senate in some ways, which is you've got an uneven playing field for Republicans in competitive seats, and there's just the environment is such that it's very, very difficult to compete in that many districts from a dollars and body sense. You got to get people on the ground motivated, and so I think it is not the best environment if you're a Republican, and it's becoming increasingly tough.
So you think it'll be close?
I think I think it's close right now, but I think the next few weeks could be really interesting, because I think Democrats have an opportunity here to really put a lot more seats in play. Republicans have a chance to sew some things up, but if you're a Republican, you're going against history and a movement right now that's very, very challenging.
If you had to pick a Democrat that you think would be sort of the worst case scenario for Republicans, who's the sort of most feared Democrat right now, acknowledging that we are 100 years away?
I think Biden would be very difficult. He's got a very good working class appeal. He'd be a challenge. There are a few of the governors that I think would be good, because the way that they've governed hasn't been as far to the left. The problem right now, and again, you're taking advice from a guy that's a Republican strategist, is that in order, and this would be true of our party as well. It's just not. So it's not like, is that to get in, both parties are sort of pushing their candidates to go further and further to the extreme, right? So Republicans are trying to figure out how to outdo the candidate or their opponent that's on the right. They want to jump and go over. The Democrats are becoming further and further progressive, which makes it more difficult if you're sort of a governor that's been very centrist and focused on getting things done, because you haven't necessarily been able to take those votes in the Senate or oppose certain things that allow you to stake out the far left. The downside is you get into a general election, and that becomes much more difficult because you've gone so far to the left. How do you tack back in? So the interesting dynamic for me will be to see that you're going to have a crowded field. My guess is you've got 20 to 25 folks. We had 17 last time. You're looking at the number of people who are running, who, you've got just here in California, you probably have like 15. But you're now seeing people who are like mayors and who are saying, why not?
Yeah. I have an announcement to make. No, I'm kidding. Do you think that the Mueller investigation should be able to continue to its conclusion?
Yeah.
Noted. All right, I have a number of questions about your next steps. What are your plans, and how has your time at the White House colored, let's say, your opportunities?
I've frankly been pretty blessed with a lot of things since I've left, and I've launched a podcast. I've had some other opportunities come my way in terms of entertainment. I've got a small consulting firm that I advise some folks. So I've been in. There's a bunch of those kind of little buckets that I've had a bunch of fun in. I do a lot of public speaking and events. The book has been, nonstop for the past 2 weeks, and we've got 3 or 4 more countries to go to. We're on the road till next Friday. I get 2 days down, then back on the road. So it's not for lack of things to do right now. It's just a question of figuring out when this ends, where we want to focus a little bit more. But right now, there's a bunch of areas that I've done some things in and have been enjoyable.
And would you become a press secretary again?
No.
No? Fantastic. Okay, so we've reached the point in our program where we just have time for one last question. We are going to read in.
Can I pick?
You want to? Here. Pick.
Sean.
Okay, they're all quite good. Thank you.
These are actually really good.
Of course.
There's no swear words. Oh, here's one, swear word. Who's a hero of yours, and what do you admire about them? I write very candidly in the book about my father and his role in my life. He was not only my biggest supporter, but sort of set and instilled a set of values that I try to adhere to. And I write in the book at one point that there were a lot of days that I wish he could have seen me become press secretary, because I know how proud he would have been. But at the same time, I would have hated to know that I disappointed him a couple times. And so from that standpoint, there's no question that that's who I look at all the time and say, would my dad be proud of me?
And the book is called The Briefing: Politics, the Press, and the President. It is dedicated to Mike Spicer, Sean Spicer's father, of course. And as a reminder to our audience here, Sean will be signing books on stage in just a minute when we finish up, so please stay seated for further instructions. I'm Melissa Kane, and this meeting of the Commonwealth Club, the place where you're in the know, is now adjourned.
Can I just real quick? I just want to say thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you tonight. You've been unbelievably pleasant, respectful, and civil, and that means a lot, so thank you. I had an opportunity to talk to some of the folks before, and I mean it when I say that I don't like where the country is right now. And to the extent that I can be part of the solution, I would like to be. But I think that all of us, and again, we can figure out who's to blame and which side started it, or we can figure out how to move forward. And I think that, thank you. Look, I make no mistake, no apologies for being a conservative. But I have tremendous respect for people on the left. If you look at the acknowledgments in my book, some people are like, why do you have David Axelrod in there? And part of it is because I admire them. They are good people. They are very principled. We can totally disagree on policy, but we can respect each other a lot more than is going on in this current environment. And I hope that we can look in our own lives when we see, a family food fight breaking out, and just say, hold on, let them finish. Give them an opportunity to make their point. But we've gotten into this shouting match now where before anyone can open their mouth, it's like, here's why they are a horrible person. That's just not good for society. And I think that I appreciate you coming out tonight, and thank you for listening and not shouting. and thank you to Melissa. and the Commonwealth Club for having me. It truly is an honor, and thank you very much.
Can I do it now? Okay. All righty, the meeting is adjourned.
Now you're asking.